Siberia, the coldest place on Earth. Cold is not simply temperature, it's a force, a fact that shapes everything it touches. And nowhere on Earth inhabited by humans is colder than Siberia's far northeast. A region where winter temperatures drop below 60 degrees Celsius, where metal becomes brittle, rubber shatters, breath freezes instantly into ice crystals that fall to the ground with a sound locals call the whispering of the stars. This is not the Arctic. This is not Antarctica. This is land at roughly the same latitude as Scotland, but locked in a continental deep freeze that makes the poles seem temperate. The town of Oymyakon holds the record for the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. 67.7 degrees Celsius, measured in 1933. Though locals claim it's been colder since. At those temperatures, the world operates by different rules. Water thrown into the air freezes before it hits the ground. Cars must be kept running continuously, or their engines will never start again. Eyelashes freeze together when you blink. 13 million square kilometers of forest, tundra and mountain stretched across northern Asia. Siberia is not one landscape but many, united by a single characteristic: extreme cold that dominates life for 8 months of every year. The people who live here, Russians, Saka, Evenks, Evens, dozens of other groups, have adapted in ways that seem impossible to outsiders. They've built cities on permafrost, created a vocabulary for cold that includes 40 different words because a single word is insufficient. This is Siberia at its most extreme. Not the resource colony, not the political borderland, but the place itself. Raw, hostile, beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. This is cold that kills if you're unprepared. Cold that tests the limits of a human endurance. Cold that has shaped a culture uniquely suited to survive it. This is the coldest place on Earth where people choose, or are forced, to live. Oymyakon, the pole of cold. 500 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, in the Sakha Republic's interior, lies Oymyakon. Population 500. Elevation 740 meters. The coldest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. The name comes from the Saka word for unfrozen water, referring to a nearby hot spring where reindeer herders once gathered. The irony is absolute. The village exists in a valley where cold air settles and stagnates, creating temperatures that defy comprehension. In January, the average is -50 degrees Celsius. The sun rises around 10 a.m. and sets by 3 p.m., barely climbing above the horizon. At night, with clear skies, temperatures can drop to -65 degrees Celsius or lower. This is cold that hurts to breathe, that makes your lungs ache with every inhalation, that turns exposed skin white with frostbite in less than a minute. Life here requires constant adaptation. Buildings are raised on stilts because body heat would melt the permafrost beneath and cause structural collapse. Water pipes are either above ground in insulated casings or don't exist. Many residents still collect water from the river in buckets. Outhouses are standard because indoor plumbing is nearly impossible to maintain. The ground is frozen solid to a depth of 1,500 meters, deeper than most mountains are tall. Cars are the most visible challenge. Engines must run 24 hours a day in winter because if they stop, they won't restart without hours of warming with blowtorches and hot water. Gas stations keep pumps indoors. Tires develop flat spots from sitting on frozen ground. Batteries die in minutes if removed from a running vehicle. Locals joke that cars here are never turned off, only inherited. Yet people live here by choice. The Saka have inhabited this region for centuries, developing breeds of horses and cattle that survive outdoors year-round. Small, shaggy animals with metabolisms adapted to extract maximum energy from minimal food. These horses dig through snow to reach frozen grass, can survive without shelter, and provide transportation, meat and milk. They're as essential to life here as the permafrost itself. The Soviet era brought infrastructure, a school, a clinic, apartments with central heating, but also exploitation. Oymyakon was a stopover on the Road of Bones, the Gulag highway where prisoners froze to death by the thousands. The village provided supplies to labor camps, profited from their operation, watched convoys of doomed men pass through on their way to Kolyma's gold mines. That history sits uneasily alongside the town's tourism efforts. Visitors come now to experience the coldest place, take photos beside the temperature monument, spend a night and leave as quickly as possible. The residents are pragmatic about their home's reputation. Yes, it's unbearably cold. Yes, life is hard. But it's also quiet, familiar, theirs. Young people leave for Yakutsk or Moscow when they can. But some stay, and a few even return. There's pride in enduring what others can't, in maintaining life where life shouldn't be possible. The cold defines them. Without it, Oymyakon would be just another forgotten village. With it, they're legendary. Verkhoyansk, the other pole. 1,200 kilometers north of Oymyakon. Verkhoyansk disputes the title of coldest inhabited place. Its recorded minimum is 67.8 degrees Celsius, measured in 1892. Technically colder than Oymyakon's record, though the measurement methods were different and the rivalry remains unresolved. What's certain is this: both places are cold enough that the difference is academic. At 65 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Celsius, you die the same way. Verkhoyansk, population 1,200, sits on the Lena River in a landscape of taiga forest and permafrost. Founded in 1638 as a Cossack outpost, it became a place of exile. Political prisoners were sent here throughout the Tsarist and Soviet eras, condemned to a cold that was itself a form of punishment. The town's museum preserves letters and photographs from exiles who survived or didn't. The temperature range is what makes Verkhoyansk truly extreme. Summer temperatures can reach 37 degrees Celsius, a swing of over 100 degrees from winter lows. This is the most extreme temperature range on Earth for a permanently inhabited place. The seasons don't transition gradually. They arrive suddenly and absolutely. Spring is 2 weeks long, autumn is shorter. You're either in deep cold or brief, intense warmth, nothing in between. Trees grow at odd angles because their roots can't penetrate far, causing drunken forest, where trunks tilt in every direction. Lakes freeze solid to the bottom. Rivers carry ice flows even in summer. The landscape itself seems uncertain, as if the Earth can't decide whether it's capable of supporting life. The indigenous Evens and Saka people adapted to this through nomadism, following reindeer and game across vast territories, never staying long enough in one place for the cold to trap them. The Russian colonizers who built permanent settlements imposed a different logic. Stay put, endure, survive through technology and infrastructure. It works, barely. The town has electricity, heating, a school, a small airport, but it's always precarious. Always dependent on systems that can fail catastrophically when temperatures drop. Climate change is visible here in ways that terrify locals. Permafrost thaw undermines buildings. Warmer summers mean forest fires that were once rare. Ice roads that connected remote communities now form later and melt earlier, shortening the season when transportation is possible. For a place defined entirely by cold, warming is an existential threat, not because minus 50 degrees Celsius winters are pleasant, but because the infrastructure, the culture, the entire way of life is calibrated to extreme cold. Moderate cold is actually more dangerous because nothing is designed for it. Verkhoyansk endures because it always has. The people here don't romanticize their home. They're clear-eyed about its hardships, but they also understand something that outsiders don't. Cold is honest. It doesn't pretend, doesn't deceive. If you're prepared, you survive. If you're not, you die. There's clarity in that. A kind of brutal fairness that makes more sense than the complicated injustices of warmer, wealthier places. Yakutsk, the frozen capital. Yakutsk, population 300,000, is the coldest major city in the world, and the largest city built entirely on permafrost. Every building, every road, every pipe and power line must account for frozen ground that never thaws, not even a meter below the surface. The city sits on stilts. a forest of concrete pillars sunk deep into ice that's been solid for millennia. Winter here is minus 40 degrees Celsius on average, with frequent drops to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The city fills with ice fog, suspended moisture that freezes in the air, reducing visibility to meters, coating everything in frost. At those temperatures, the world becomes alien. Exhaust from cars freezes instantly into ice clouds. Moisture in breath crystallizes and falls as tiny ice particles. People wrap their faces completely, leaving only eyes exposed, moving quickly from building to building because staying outside for more than a few minutes becomes dangerous. The architecture is purely functional. Massive apartment blocks painted in bright colors to combat the psychological weight of 8-month winters. Heating pipes run above ground in insulated casings, steam rising from them even at minus 45 degrees Celsius. The permafrost means underground utilities are impossible. Everything must be accessible for constant repair. When pipes freeze, as they inevitably do, residents lose heat and water until crews can thaw and fix them. Work that requires blowtorches and patience measured in days. Yet Yakutsk functions. It has theaters, universities, museums, a surprisingly vibrant cultural life. The Saka people maintain their language here more successfully than in rural areas. Paradoxically, the city provides resources for education, publishing, cultural preservation that smaller communities lack. There are Saka language newspapers, radio stations, schools where children learn their indigenous tongue alongside Russian. The underground is what makes Yakutsk truly strange. Permafrost tunnels, a research facility and tourist attraction, descend into frozen ground that's been solid for hundreds of thousands of years. The ice contains preserved remains of woolly mammoths, ancient horses, bison that went extinct millennia ago. It's a time capsule holding DNA and tissue that scientists study to understand Ice Age ecosystems. The tunnels stay at minus 10 degrees Celsius year-round without refrigeration because the ground simply never warms. The economy runs on diamonds, gold, and oil extracted from the broader Yakutia region. Alrosa, the Russian diamond monopoly, is headquartered here. The wealth this generates is visible in Yakutsk downtown. New buildings, expensive cars, restaurants and shops that would seem normal in Moscow, but feel surreal in a city where winter is 8 months long and minus 50 degrees Celsius is routine. The contradiction is stark. Immense natural wealth extracted from hostile conditions, with most profits flowing elsewhere. The Saka people, whose ancestors survived here for centuries without modern technology, now watch as their land makes others rich while they struggle with crumbling infrastructure and declining health outcomes. Life expectancy in Yakutia is 5 years below the Russian average. Alcoholism, tuberculosis, and suicide rates are all significantly higher. Yakutsk endures because it must. Too many people live here now to relocate. Too much infrastructure has been built at enormous cost to abandon. The city is trapped by its own existence, committed to maintaining life in a place that resists habitation at every turn. The cold is relentless, patient, waiting for the moment when heating fails, when supplies don't arrive, when the systems that keep 300,000 people alive break down. It hasn't happened yet, but the cold is always there, testing, probing, reminding everyone that this city exists by permission of forces it can never fully control. Norilsk, cold and poison. If Yakutsk is the coldest major city, Norilsk is the coldest industrial city and the most polluted. Built 300 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle by Gulag prisoners in the 1930s, it exists solely to extract nickel, copper, palladium, and platinum from some of the richest ore deposits on Earth. Population 175,000, all of them here because the wages are double or triple what they could earn elsewhere. Compensation for living in a place that tries to kill you in multiple ways simultaneously. Winter temperatures reach minus 55 degrees Celsius. The sun disappears for 2 months. Winds from the Arctic reach 140 km per hour, creating wind chills that make exposed skin freeze in seconds. But the cold is almost secondary to the pollution. The smelters release 2 million tons of sulfur dioxide annually, more than the entire country of France. The air burns your lungs. The snow is black from particulate matter. Nothing grows within 50 kilometers. The city was built by prisoners who died by the tens of thousands, worked to death, frozen to death, killed in accidents that were never properly recorded. They're buried in mass graves outside town, unmarked, forgotten, except by a few small memorials that the city reluctantly maintains. Norilsk's entire existence is a monument to Soviet brutality, to the belief that human life was expendable if it advanced industrial production. Today, Norilsk Nickel, one of Russia's largest companies, controls everything. The apartments, the stores, the hospitals, the schools. It's a company town in the most literal sense. Residents work for the company or service those who do. There's no other economy, no other reason to be here. The company pays well because it has to. No one would stay otherwise. The contradiction is constant. Norilsk produces metals essential for modern technology. Your phone, your computer, electric vehicles all contain materials mined here. The global green energy transition depends on metals extracted under conditions that are about as far from green as possible. The workers know this, shrug at the irony. They're paid to extract, not to philosophize about supply chains and environmental costs. Life expectancy here is 10 years below the Russian average. Respiratory diseases are epidemic. Cancer rates are elevated. Children are encouraged to leave as soon as they're able. Yet people stay. Some because they were born here and know nothing else. some because they're accumulating money for retirement elsewhere, some because they've simply given up on the idea that life can be different. The cold compounds everything. In a warmer climate, pollution disperses. Here, it settles and concentrates, trapped by temperature inversions that pin it to the ground for days. The combination of -50 degrees Celsius and toxic air creates conditions that would be illegal in any country that enforced environmental or labor laws. Russia does not. Norilsk endures because the metals are too valuable to leave in the ground. The modern global economy keeps it running, buys its output, ignores the human and environmental cost. And the cold preserves everything: the pollution in the soil, the bodies in the permafrost, the evidence of what humans will do to each other when metal is more valuable than life. Tiksi, the Arctic port on the shore of the Laptov Sea. 800 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Tiksi clings to existence at the edge of the frozen ocean. Population 4,500, down from 12,000 in Soviet times. This was a strategic military port, a base for Arctic operations, a refueling station for ships attempting the Northern Sea route. When the Soviet Union collapsed, so did Tiksi's purpose. Winter here lasts 9 months. The sun disappears for 3 months straight. Polar night that begins in November and doesn't end until February. Average January temperature is -35 degrees Celsius. But wind from the Arctic pushes it far lower. The sea freezes solid, ice extending kilometers from shore, creating a landscape that's neither land nor water, but something in between. A white void that stretches to the horizon. The town itself is decaying visibly. Apartment blocks stand half empty, windows broken, heating systems failing. The Soviet infrastructure was never meant to last. It was built quickly, cheaply, with the assumption that maintenance would be continuous. But maintenance stopped in the 1990s. Now buildings collapse slowly, claimed by permafrost thaw and structural failure. Entire neighborhoods have been abandoned, their residents relocated to less damaged sections, or evacuated to mainland Russia entirely. The people who remain are mostly indigenous. Evenks and Saka, who've lived in this region longer than Russia has existed. They fish through the ice, hunt seal and walrus when they can, supplement with government rations that arrive irregularly by air. In summer, when the ice breaks, supply ships reach Tiksi, bringing food, fuel, building materials. If the ships don't come, the winter becomes dangerous. The Arctic Research Station still operates, studying climate change, monitoring sea ice extent, measuring temperatures and recording data that confirms what locals already know. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Sea ice forms later each year, breaks up earlier. The permafrost beneath Tiksi is thawing, undermining foundations, causing buildings to tilt and crack. The town is sinking slowly into ground that's been frozen for millennia. There's talk of reviving the Northern Sea route. Global warming making Arctic shipping viable for more months each year. If that happens, Tiksi might regain strategic importance, might see investment and population return, or it might not. The town exists in limbo, waiting to see if warming will save it, or finish the collapse that started when the Cold War ended. The residents don't speak of hope or despair. They speak of endurance, of making it through another winter, of small victories like functioning heat or fresh fish. This far north, survival is its own achievement. Everything else is secondary. Zhigansk, the river town. On the Lena River, 500 kilometers north of Yakutsk, Zhigansk sits in isolation that's geographic and temporal. A town that feels decades behind the already remote capital. Population 3,500. Accessible only by air year-round or by river barge in summer or ice road in winter. When the river is freezing or thawing, several weeks in spring and fall. Zhigansk is completely cut off. This is traditional Saka and Evenki territory. Reindeer herding and fishing sustained communities here for centuries before Russian colonization. The town itself was founded in 1632 as a Cossack outpost, making it one of the oldest Russian settlements in the region. But settlement is generous. For most of its history, Zhigansk was a few buildings where trappers and traders gathered. Not a permanent town. Soviet development brought schools, clinics, apartments. The collective farm system organized reindeer herding into state-controlled operations. Indigenous children were sent to boarding schools where speaking Sakha or Evenki was punished. The culture survived, but damaged, fragmented, passed down in secret or not at all. Now the schools teach indigenous languages again, but many grandparents never learned to read in their own tongue, creating a gap where traditional knowledge should flow. Winter here is minus 45 degrees Celsius average, with frequent drops below minus 55 degrees Celsius. The river freezes over 2 meters thick, becoming the winter highway. Trucks drive across carrying supplies, fuel, construction materials. But the ice road season is shortening. 20 years ago, it was reliable from October to April. Now it's December to March, and even then, warm spells create dangerous conditions. Once, the cold was the enemy. Now its weakening is almost worse. The permafrost here is particularly unstable, ice-rich ground that turns to soup when it thaws. Buildings sink at visible rates, requiring constant jacking up and re-leveling. The cemetery has become grotesque, coffins emerging from thawing ground, tilting at angles, some fully exposed. The bodies don't decay, permafrost preserves them, but they can't stay buried either. It's a literal rising of the dead, an unintended consequence of warming that horrifies locals. Young people leave as soon as they're able. There are no jobs beyond subsistence hunting and fishing. No prospects. No future that doesn't look exactly like the present. The population is aging, declining, approaching the point where the town becomes unviable. Schools may close for lack of students. The clinic struggles to keep doctors. Few want to work in a place this isolated, this cold, this lacking in basic infrastructure. Zhigansk endures because a few hundred people refuse to leave. Because this is home despite everything. Because somewhere has to be the last place people abandon. But the endurance feels temporary, provisional. The cold defined life here for centuries. Now the cold is weakening, and with it, the entire basis for existence is coming undone. Magadan, the gateway to Kolyma. On the sea of Yakutsk's northern shore, Magadan sits at the end of the road, literally. This is where the Kolyma highway begins. Stretching 2,000 kilometers into the interior, built on the bones of prisoners who died constructing it. Population 90,000, down from 150,000 in Soviet times. This was the gateway to the gulags, the last glimpse of the ocean that millions of prisoners saw before disappearing into the frozen interior. Ships arrived here from Vladivostok and Nakodka, packed with political prisoners, criminals, intellectuals, anyone Stalin's state wanted removed. They disembarked at Magadan's port, were sorted, processed, and sent inland to labor camps scattered across Kolyma's gold fields. The mortality rate was staggering. Perhaps 1 in 3 prisoners died, though exact numbers remain disputed. The cold was a weapon as effective as bullets. The city itself was built by and for this system. Every brick, every street, every building constructed with slave labor. The architectural style is Soviet industrial. Massive concrete blocks, no ornamentation, purely functional. But scattered throughout are remnants that tell darker stories. Former NKVD headquarters, transit prisons. the administration buildings where prisoners' fates were decided with bureaucratic efficiency. Winter temperatures average -20 degrees Celsius. Relatively mild by Siberian standards, but brutal when combined with coastal winds that cut through clothing. The Sea of Oymyakon freezes partially. Ice forming along the shore, but the port generally remains accessible. One reason it was chosen as the Gulag gateway. Supplies could arrive even in winter. Prisoners could be transported year-round. Today, Magadan struggles with its identity. Is it a memorial to Soviet crimes, or a city trying to move forward? The Mask of Sorrow monument stands on a hill overlooking the city. A massive concrete face, 15 meters tall, with tears and smaller faces embedded in it, representing the Gulag victims. It was erected in 1996, one of the few official acknowledgements of what happened here. But many residents resent it. They want to be known for something other than suffering. Want their city to have a purpose beyond being a memorial to atrocity. The economy depends on gold mining, fishing, and government subsidies. Young people leave as soon as they can. There's little future here, little opportunity. The population declines steadily. Buildings are abandoned, left to decay. The port operates at a fraction of Soviet-era capacity. The city feels like it's waiting for something, permission to die, or a reason to continue existing. The coastline around Magadan is starkly beautiful. Rocky cliffs, cold grey ocean. Fog that rolls in suddenly and completely. In summer, the hills turn briefly green. Wildflowers bloom. The landscape reveals what it might be without the weight of history. But the history is inescapable. This is land stained by human cruelty, where the coal was used as an instrument of state terror, where millions suffered because geography made their suffering efficient. Magadan endures because 90,000 people still live here. Because it's home despite everything. Because even places built for evil purposes eventually just become places. But it's haunted. You feel it walking the streets. The knowledge that this city's foundation is mass graves, that its prosperity was built on slavery, that it exists only because Stalin needed a gateway to his frozen empire of labor camps. The cold here isn't just weather. It's memory, preserved like everything else in permafrost, impossible to forget or escape. The Lena River, artery of ice. The Lena River is Siberia's lifeline. 4,400 kilometers from its source, in the mountains south of Lake Baikal, to its delta on the Laptov Sea. It's the 11th longest river in the world, draining an area larger than Western Europe. Yet most people outside Russia have never heard of it. This is not a river of cities and civilization. This is a river of wilderness, cold, and isolation. For 9 months of the year, the Lena is frozen. Not just ice on the surface, frozen solid, sometimes to depths of 3 meters or more. The ice is strong enough to support loaded trucks, entire convoys that drive across as if it were pavement. Winter ice roads follow the Lena's course for hundreds of kilometers, connecting communities that have no other land connection. When the ice is solid, the river is a highway. When it's breaking up or freezing over, it's a barrier, and the towns along its banks are cut off completely. The river doesn't freeze uniformly. It begins in the south, where temperatures drop first and progresses north. But the spring thaw happens in reverse. Southern ice melts while northern ice remains solid, creating catastrophic ice jams. Water backs up behind frozen barriers, floods villages, tears away riverbanks. The annual spring flood is predictable but devastating. Towns evacuate the same neighborhoods every year, rebuild every summer, evacuate again the following spring. Yakutsk sits on the Lena's western bank. 300,000 people depending entirely on this river for supplies. In summer, barges carry fuel, food, construction materials, everything needed to survive the next winter. The shipping season is brief, June to September, maybe 4 months if conditions are favorable. If supplies don't arrive during those months, the winter becomes dangerous. The river giveth, and the river taketh away, and there's no appealing its decisions. The Lena Delta, where the river meets the Arctic Ocean, is one of the largest river deltas in the world. 32,000 square kilometers of channels, islands, and wetlands. In summer, it's a breeding ground for millions of migratory birds, a temporary explosion of life at the edge of the frozen sea. In winter, it's abandoned, empty, a maze of ice and snow that no one inhabits or crosses. The indigenous peoples who lived here traditionally, the Saka and Evenki, moved seasonally. Spending summers in the delta's rich fishing grounds and winters inland where survival was more feasible. The river's tributaries extend into the coldest regions on Earth, the Olden, the Vilyuy, the Oymyakon. Rivers that themselves would be major waterways in other countries. But here are just feeders to the Lena's immense drainage. These tributaries carry water from the pole of cold region, from Oymyakon and Verkhoyansk, bringing the coldest water on Earth to mix with the main channel. Climate change is transforming the Lena in ways that terrify those who depend on it. The ice forms later each year. What was once predictable in early October now might not happen until November. It breaks up earlier, April instead of May, sometimes even March. The ice road season shortens, strangling communities that need those months to bring in supplies. The spring floods become more unpredictable. Ice jams forming in new locations. Devastation arriving without warning. The permafrost along the riverbanks is thawing, causing massive erosion. Entire sections of bank collapse into the river. Trees, soil. Sometimes buildings sliding into the water. The Lena is widening, its course shifting, channels changing in ways that make navigation dangerous. River pilots who've worked these waters for decades find their knowledge becoming obsolete. Sandbars appearing where deep channels used to be. Channels opening where islands once stood. Scientists study the Lena's discharge rates, measuring how much fresh water enters the Arctic Ocean, because this affects ocean salinity, which affects ocean currents, which affects global climate patterns. The Lena is not just a regional river, it's a component of Earth's climate system. As permafrost thaws in its vast drainage basin, more water flows to the Arctic, diluting seawater, potentially disrupting the thermohaline circulation that regulates planetary temperature. For the people who live along its banks, these global implications are abstract. What matters is whether the ice road will hold, whether the spring flood will destroy their homes, whether the barges will arrive with fuel and food. The Lena is personal, immediate. The difference between survival and death in a place where alternatives don't exist. In summer, the river is beautiful, wide, powerful, flowing through taiga forests and tundra landscapes that seem untouched by human presence. Birds wheel overhead, fish jump in the current. The water catches light in ways that make it look alive. It's easy to understand why people have lived here for thousands of years, following the river's cycles, taking what it offers, enduring what it demands. In winter, the Lena becomes something else entirely. A frozen road, a barrier, a sleeping giant that will wake violently in spring. The ice is so thick that standing on it, you forget there's water underneath. Forget that this solid surface will liquefy and become impassable, dangerous, deadly. The river teaches the same lesson the cold teaches. Nothing permanent exists here. Everything is temporary. Survival depends on understanding transitions and timing them correctly. The Lena will outlast every human settlement on its banks. It flowed long before cities existed. Will flow long after they are abandoned. The cold will remain, though perhaps less extreme. The ice will still form, though perhaps for fewer months. The river is changing as rivers do. Indifferent to human schedules and needs. Those who live along it must change too, adapt to new patterns, learn new timing. Or leave, the river offers that choice. Clearly and without sentiment, adapt or go elsewhere. The Pole of Cold region, Sakha Republic. The broader Sakha Republic, officially Yakutia, is the largest subnational territory in the world. Bigger than India, almost entirely unpopulated outside a handful of cities. This is the heart of the cold. The region where temperature records are set and broken, where the continental climate reaches its most extreme expression. The Saka people are Turkic, not Slavic. They migrated here from the south centuries ago, displacing earlier populations, adapting to conditions that test the limits of human endurance. They developed a culture entirely calibrated to cold. Clothing made from reindeer hide and fur. Housing designed to conserve heat. A diet heavy in fat and meat because the body needs maximum calories to maintain temperature in -50°C conditions. Traditional Saka life involved constant movement. Summer and winter homes, seasonal hunting and fishing grounds, nothing permanent. Because permanence meant vulnerability. You moved before the cold trapped you, before food ran out, before conditions became unsurvivable. The Soviet state forced settlement, created collective farms, built towns in locations chosen for industrial convenience rather than survivability. Many of those towns are failing now. Populations declining, infrastructure crumbling, young people fleeing as soon as they can. The Saka language survives better here than most indigenous Siberian languages, spoken by roughly 450,000 people. But it's under pressure. Russian is the language of advancement, of education, of leaving. Saka is the language of tradition, of staying, of a way of life that's disappearing. Parents must choose, teach their children the language and culture of their ancestors, or prepare them for a Russian-speaking world where opportunities exist elsewhere. The land itself is changing. Permafrost thaw accelerates every year. Sinkholes appear where ice lenses melt, swallowing roads and buildings. Methane released from thawing, permafrost accelerates warming in a feedback loop that scientists watch with alarm. The taiga forest is shifting north. Tree line advancing into territory that was tundra for millennia. the Saka people, who've survived here for 5 centuries through intimate knowledge of cold, now face a future where that knowledge may become obsolete. Climate change in Yakutia is not an abstraction. It's visible in buildings tilting as permafrost thaws beneath them. It's measurable in ice road seasons that shorten every year. It's felt in summer fires that burn forests never designed to burn. The coldest place on Earth is warming faster than almost anywhere else. And the people whose entire culture is calibrated to extreme cold are being forced to adapt to something entirely different. The Saka will adapt. They always have. But what they're adapting to now isn't another invader or political system or economic collapse. It's the land itself changing. The cold that defined them for centuries. Becoming less extreme, less predictable, less reliable. Their identity is built on surviving cold that kills outsiders. What happens when the cold becomes survivable by anyone?